Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. We'll continue to see easterly winds dominating the rest of this working week, even into the weekend, keeping pretty chilly air right over the top of us. This does bring an increasing risk of sleet and snow as we progress over the coming days. Still not a substantial risk, the dew points are still very marginal along with those upper air temperatures, but there will be plenty of precipitation around. So in heavier bursts within some of these slightly colder pools, there is the risk of some quite heavy falling snow potentially in places. But we're not expecting anything too major at this stage. It is too marginal, and you can see that exemplified here on the live radar. We've got a lot of precipitation coming in from the east, but it's really a raw mix at the moment between rain, a bit of ice, sleet, and little bits of snow over the higher ground. As we progress into the longer range, that's where we've been really keeping a very close eye on as we head in towards the middle of the month. We've had some exceptionally cold runs over the past 5 days or so, and we've also had some very mild runs. Now today we have seen a bit of a change in that pattern, a bit of a trend developing, and for those who want cold conditions or very cold conditions, it's probably not a good one. There has definitely been a slight milder shift within the ensembles. Instead of being kind of 60-70% going for that very cold solution, it's more like 50-60-70% going for a more of a milder solution. So not a guarantee, but definitely a little bit of a flip. As we thought a few days ago, the very cold solutions were starting to win out. Now it looks like those milder solutions are going to win out. It's not a definitive, as I said, there are still plenty of very cold runs. Just the majority are now veering towards that milder solution. And all we can really do is talk about what the data is showing. It still will probably be chilly. The winds will probably still be coming in from the east or south easterly direction, but it would just reduce the risk of any substantial snow or very cold conditions into the second half of the month. But of course, we'll explore that in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. And remember to follow me on Twitter as well. The link's in the description. Now to start on the live radar, you see a real mix of rain, sleet and snow pushing in from the east at the moment. Majority is rain, especially towards the eastern coastal areas and to low-lying areas. But we're seeing bits and bobs of snow mixing in across the far southeast, across parts of the Midlands, Northern England, into Scotland as well. Again, I wouldn't trust these exact precipitation typings. Again, they're not always the most accurate when it's not clear-cut like this. They're normally pretty decent when we've got a real clear-cut cold front or warm front, if the warm air is advancing. And we've got quite a steep gradient between mild and cold air. It's normally pretty accurate there. But when it's like this, and it's very, very uncertain and very marginal, it sometimes does struggle. So some of this rain is probably falling as sleet, ice or snow, and some of this snow that's showing is probably falling as rain. So can't take this too literally, but it does just show you that it is very marginal out there at the moment. Majority is rain, but over the next few hours, there is a higher risk that some of it falls as snow. But we're not expecting, any disruption at all, just perhaps a bit of falling snow as this does move in. Again, I've seen a lot of people commenting, only if we were a couple of degrees cold, only if the dew points were slightly lower, and only if the near constant was very cold instead of being mild, then we would have had a really cold wintry week this past week. Even though it's not a very cold pattern, it's an east or southeasterly wind, it still would have delivered something quite substantial if the near continent was cold or remotely cold, whereas at the moment, or at least recently, it's been fairly mild. And that's why these easterly winds have got higher dew points, a lot more moist, as they've got milder air mixing in within the different atmospheric layers. So that's the reason why we continue to see it being really quite marginal. But the one thing we can't say is that it is mild at all. It is still really cold. You see the temperatures hovering around the 1, 2, 3 degree mark. Of course, it's not freezing at the surface, but just above freezing. And of course, with the slightly milder air aloft, with those higher dew points, it means we've just got really cold rain out there. And that will likely continue over the coming days, as I said, with a bit of mix of sleet and snow. And there are some slightly colder, drier air masses mixing in, so that does increase that risk of snow. And it also increases the risk of frosts as well. Now, if you look at the latest UKV, you can see precipitation continuing to stream in from the east over the coming hours. Bits and bobs of snow, but generally remaining mostly as rain to low-lying areas and towards coastal areas. As we headed through Tuesday, it does turn drier, but still lots of cloud around, still feeling very cold, and into Wednesday, a similar story, a bit more of a sunshine breaking through, but still nothing too substantial. Thursday into Friday, we start to see some weather fronts approaching from the southwest. This is the battle starting to appear for the middle of the month. And you can see precipitation moves in, does bump into that cold air and could turn to snow in there, some of the heavier pulses. Again, it is a transitional event, so could see a few centimetres of snow, some substantial snow in a few spots, before it does turn back to rain. But regardless, it's coming up against that very cold block. And this is exactly the predicament we're seeing within the longer range runs. Low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, high pressure to our north and northeast, trying to pull in easterly winds. The UKV has southeasterly winds and a real massive temperature gradient from very cold air, -8 to -10, down to milder air, a few degrees above freezing. And you can see the dew points just showing you the difference there. Cold, snow-worthy air, mild Atlantic air. And it means that this battleground is right over our shores. And this is what's giving us some massive headaches in the longer range. There's still runs that keep the very cold air in place. But I have to admit now that the majority of runs, perhaps around 2/3 now, are bringing more of that milder air in, at least for the majority of the time. If we look at the max temperatures through this evening, temperatures just holding slightly above freezing, around the 1 to 4 degree mark. So very cold, pretty much as cold as it can get without it being snow. Into Tuesday, temperatures not really improving much by day, 1 to 4 degrees still. And through the evening, again, really hovering around those low single digits and not too much in the way of a diurnal range, just very cold conditions. Wednesday with a bit more brightness, maybe 5 to 7, but with all those clear skies, perhaps more of a risk of a frost. Into Thursday, still cold, kind of 3 to 7 degrees, more of a widespread frost there into Friday. And Friday, another cold day, maybe even colder with only 1 to 2 degrees. That's where that precipitation and risk of snow starts to push in. And then another frost in the north, and then into Saturday, the battle sets up. 10 or 11 across the southwest, freezing across the northeast. As I said, majority of runs, about 60-70% now, do bring that milder in for all, but still a few hold that cold air in place. And there's a few, very few, maybe 5 or 6 ensemble members per run that keep the cold air in place for all, and that would deliver a very cold spell. Now, if you look at the GFS, this just exemplifies what I've been talking about, where we are so close to being very cold. And it does flirt with being very cold, perhaps for a few days, but it never fully comes off. Easterly winds continue over the coming days, and that continues all the way into the weekend. And then we get the battle, southwesterlies up against northeasterlies, and the GFS has that southeasterly set up. And if you look at the upper air temperatures, look at this, exceptionally cold air, just flirting with the east coast. However, out to the west, very mild air is moving in. And even for a period of time, we do get the -10 isotherm just flirting along the east coast. Perhaps even as soon as Sunday, that very cold air is in place. But the southwesterlies mostly win out. Not the whole time. Cold air does get in place for North England, Scotland, and maybe even Eastern England. But generally, mild southwesterlies prevent it from being a proper, predominantly cold pattern, and that is the predicament. That is the issues. Some runs, as I said, got that cold air fully in place. Other runs, milder air fully in place, or quite a few like this, kind of in between, with cold air and milder air mixing. If you look at the GM, it's broadly very similar. Again, that southwesterly does develop. We do see, that southeasterly does develop. We see a real battle between cold air and mild air. Mild air definitely winning out a bit more. That -10 isotherm is maybe a couple hundred miles further eastwards. And eventually, we do continue to see some of that flirting of that colder air. But eventually, that yellows and oranges, that milder air, does win out. Cold air stays so close to the northeast and eastern Scotland, but for most of us, 80-90% of us here, we would be in a mild Atlantic flow. It is agonising for those cold and snow lovers to see this huge pool of exceptionally cold air to our east, but we can't fully tap into it. You can just see where the boundary is across northern and eastern England. This is what we're seeing from a lot of runs today. Now, finally, if we finish by looking at the latest ECMWF, it's not fully come out yet, but we'll look out to 192 hours. Anything beyond that, really, at the moment, with the uncertainty that there is redundant. You can see the easterly winds continue. We do see that southeasterly developing through the weekend, and ECMWF not even attempting to bring cold air. That cold air is much further eastwards, even removing it from much of Central Europe, and we're all in a mild southerly airflow. Signs of spring would be seen here. Look at that. Upper temperatures up towards 7 or 8 degrees, almost 10 degrees above average. That would be very mild indeed. But just shows you that very cold air just off the screen towards Denmark and Scandinavia, but ECMWF not flirting with it at all this evening. Now, if you do look at the latest ensembles, latest GFS, you can see we're generally hovering around average or below average over the coming days, but being pretty dry, increasingly dry towards the weekend. Apart from perhaps the flirting of that weather fronts from the southwest. Again, UKV picking up on that, but most of these GFS ensembles not wanting to show that solution. It's going to be cold and frosty, but nothing too exceptional. As we end early next week, there is a bit of a trend towards a colder pattern. So initially a cold air could rush in from the east, but you can see, as said, 60%, 70% bring us back towards average or slightly above average. No massive mild sectors. There's a few runs getting above 5 degrees or close to that ECWF run, which we've got up to 8 or 9. Majority still keep us chilly, with a southeasterly under higher pressure. Precipitation flirting, but nothing too crazy until perhaps the last week of February. But you can see those very cold runs are still there, down towards -10, -15, but they are reducing in number. Or there's nowhere near as many as there was 2 days ago, let's just say. Perhaps they've halved in number. So not completely eradicated, but definitely has been a shift today towards some of those milder solutions. But as ever, if we look at this ensemble chart in isolation, we forget about what the models were showing yesterday or the day before. One thing you'd say is there is massive uncertainty. There's a 20-25 degree temperature spread within these ensemble members, which just shows you that there still is a lot to play for. Now, if you finish by looking at the latest ECMWF, broadly very similar over the coming days, but then we do see a little bit of a difference there into the second half of February. A lot more in the way of those milder runs. ECMWF much more confident in that average or slightly above average pattern. Those cold runs still exist, but nowhere near as strong. So again, another shift towards something slightly milder. So at this stage, we can't say nothing's going to happen. No cold weather is going to occur, but at the moment, definitely that milder shift. We saw a colder shift a few days ago, so perhaps this is a milder shift before it trends to something else. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see, but the time is ticking. We are countdown now, kind of 6 or 7 days away from that very cold air transitioning towards Western Europe. So not too long before that pattern really needs to be locked in. Probably tomorrow or Wednesday at the latest, until that pattern will be locked in, and I doubt we'll see much in the way of deviations. So I have to wait and see. The next couple of runs will be very, very important. If we see something shifting back to colder patterns, then this is a bit of a wobble, but if we see them consolidate with this slightly milder pattern, then I think it could be a real red flag to that colder weather. As I said in the past few videos, I did have a sneaky suspicion that this was going to happen. It happens quite often, but hoped something slightly different this time. But again, we'll wait and see. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.